It is so wonderful to be back with my 4th U family this morning, even here in this virtual space. So much gratitude to Reverend Mark and the entire 4th Universalist staff. Thank you all for having me. When I was a kid, I was not lucky enough to live near my grandparents. I grew up in New Jersey. My grandparents lived all the way out in Omaha, Nebraska. And we only got to see them about once a year, and it was always a big deal. I remember looking forward to our visits to Omaha. I looked forward to seeing my grandparents waiting for us outside the airport terminal. I looked forward to them taking us to their local zoo. They were so proud of that zoo. I looked forward to what they called sneak breakfasts, which were mornings when my grandparents would wake my brother and I up really early before my parents even woke up, and they would sneak us out of the house to go get pancakes. I'll admit, I also looked forward to watching their cable television. That was a real treat for me and my brother who didn't have cable. But these were nice visits to Omaha, and it was so good to be together. When I think back on these visits, another thing that also stands out to me in those memories were the times when I could see my grandmother's face getting sad. She would be hugging us when we arrived at the airport, and I'd hear her say, "Oh, I can't believe you're only going to be here for a week." We would be in the reptile house at the zoo laughing about how gross we thought the snakes were. And then I would see my grandma's face fall, and she'd say, "Oh, I'm going to be so sad when it's time for you to leave." We would be pouring syrup over our pancakes early in the morning, and I'd see her shoulders drop. I've been looking forward to this visit with you for so long. I can't believe it's going to be over so quickly. During these moments, I remember feeling like I was being jolted out of the warm joy of being together, the glow of enjoying each other, and jolted with the icy cold splash of sadness and guilt. We never seemed to have enough time together. Enough. What even is enough, right? What's enough of anything? The idea of enough can feel so elusive, even unachievable. You know, these days, especially, I think it's really hard. I mean, we dance with others in the street when the first Black South Asian woman and child of immigrants is elected into the White House. But then we feel the icy cold splash, remembering that that doesn't solve everything. There's still so much work to be done and so many problems to address. We get a few days of beautiful weather back in November. Remember that? Gave us the chance to spend time with our friends and our loved ones safely outside, enjoying the sunshine. But then came that icy cold splash, remembering that we were still facing a whole winter in this pandemic. It doesn't feel like enough. Sometimes nothing feels like enough, right? I was talking about this struggle with one of the members at my congregation in Wisconsin. And I asked her where in her life she has most clearly felt that feeling of enough. And I guess I asked the right person because she didn't even hesitate to answer. She said, on my farm. And then she proceeded to talk to me all about her farm chores and how she felt in relationship with her land and the critters all around. She talked to me about being mindful of spending enough time doing farm work and also enough time simply for fun and play. She talks to me about taking enough from the land to live and also giving enough back to the land. To me, her stories were a poignant reminder of the wisdom that inherently exists in the earth and can be passed on in our deep relationship with the earth. Her stories actually drew me back to a Wendell Berry poem that I love. It's a poem called The Peace of Wild Things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. In this poem, Wendell Berry, he never once uses that word enough. And yet, to me, this poem feels like enough. It feels like he's describing an experience of enough each time I read this poem. And also, the words themselves, the words right there on the page, they feel like enough. It makes me exhale. I come in to the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. I wonder if the reason this feeling of enough can be so elusive is because enough only exists in this moment. Perhaps we can't grab enough outside of this moment. This one, right now. Or maybe this moment right now. Or perhaps this one right now. The wild things do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. Right now, the water is still. The day blind stars are there above us, just waiting with their light. The sermon I'm preaching right now is wildly different from what I thought this sermon would be when I chose the title of Enough. And the story that I shared with you all earlier was wildly different from what I thought that story would be when I planned to write a story about squirrels gathering acorns under the theme of enough. Because in a world of capitalism, comparison, and competition, we have been taught to think that enough is simply a word used to demonstrate an amount. I don't have enough money to buy that. I don't have enough time to do that. I'm not old enough, young enough, smart enough, good looking enough, strong enough, happy enough. This is why I really like the passage that Allison read to us all a moment ago. Because in this passage, Lynn Twist, she tells us that we are missing the point. She says, sufficiency isn't 2 steps up from poverty or 1 step short of abundance. It isn't a measure of barely enough or more than enough. Sufficiency isn't an amount at all. It's an experience, a context we generate, a declaration, a knowing that there is enough and that we are enough. And she goes on to say that when we live in the context of sufficiency, we find a natural freedom and integrity. We engage in life from a sense of our own wholeness rather than a desperate longing to be complete. We feel naturally called to share the resources that flow through our lives, our time, our money, our wisdom, our energy, at whatever level those resources flow, to serve our highest commitments. It can be so hard to live this declaration of sufficiency, right? Because we do live in a world that was built around capitalism, comparison, and competition. A world where struggling to have the amount of money needed to put food on the table is a lived reality for so many. Living into an experience of enough in this moment does not negate that or gloss over it or ignore it. It's not an experience that tells us that we shouldn't want anything or need anything, or that we should just appreciate what it is we have. We can feel welcome to grieve and wail at the doorstep of tragedy and injustice. We can feel moved and called to fight for a better world, and we can also feel invited to lean into experiences of sufficiency in any given moment. The wild things that do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. The presence of still water. The day-blind stars waiting with their light. The enoughness that is the birthright of existence. One thing I think that we can learn from Wendell Berry and Pasha the squirrel and Lynn Twist this morning is that honoring this birthright, drawing ourselves deeper into experiences of sufficiency and enoughness, also draws us closer to the world around us and the world that we as people of faith aspire to create. And so I say, you are enough. This moment is enough. May it be so, and amen.
Mm-hmm.